Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is still Wednesday, February 19th, 2025. It's all about 3:15 in the afternoon, and we have a last minute addition to our agenda. We're delighted to have Chris Roop and Logan Newberry here to talk. I asked them to come in to talk about the JTOC transfer, not to be confused with JITOC, which is IT. This is transportation related. So we're going to spend a little time on this. This is a $20 million that we've been getting. Maybe we've gotten more than that over the years. That has been a transfer from the transportation fund to the general fund to help us with the budget. And it's not being recommended this year. So we thought we'd find out a little bit more why. So I'll turn it over to you guys and introduce yourselves and tell us all about it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's nice to see everyone this afternoon. You see me a lot, but my name is Chris Roop. I'm an Associate Fiscal Officer over in JFO. Joining me is Logan Newberry, our Fiscal Analyst in JFO, who is in charge of staffing the transportation committees. Those of you who have been around a little while know that I first started here staffing the transportation committee. So I'm going to do just a little bit of history and then turn things over to Logan to sort of go through the details about where we are right now in the transportation world, because he spends more time in those committees than I do. But there's a few documents posted, and I'm just gonna pull up one of them real quick. Hopefully you can see that. I whipped this together.
One under your name and two under Logan's name.
Yeah, and I'm gonna start with mine, and then Logan can walk through his, but I apologize if there's any typos. I whipped this together in about an hour and literally just now. So I went back through the most recent budgets and pieced together a little bit of recent history about how the T fund and the general fund have been interacting with one another over the most recent fiscal years. And I just want to begin by saying everybody around here hears this reference, the JTOC transfer. It's like one of those weird bureaucratic terms that needs to be demystified a little bit, because I'm guilty of throwing the jargon around too. First of all, it's not a transfer. It's actually to channel what the budget director would be proud, hopefully, to hear me say this, that a transfer is when you're moving assets from one fund to another fund. That's actually not what's happening here, even though we call it the JTOC transfer. What this really refers to is there was a $20.25 million appropriation made from the T fund to offset costs of the Vermont State Police. So if you go back to prior year big bills and you look at B209, you would see appropriations going to the state police from the general fund, and you would also see $25.25 million from the T fund going there. So it is a minor nuance, but JTOC, also the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, really doesn't have anything to do with this in recent years. If you go back 20 plus years ago, the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, which is the 4 money chairs and the 2 transportation chairs, had a more significant role in making decisions about what T fund dollars would go to support other areas in the government. And we've gotten away from that model in recent decades. This used to divert over $40 million out of the T fund for other things. Now, the only real areas where you see the T fund directly supporting appropriations for things that are not directly in the VTrans budget is this $20.25 million over to the state police, and $4 million and change that goes to BGS for paying to maintain the information centers along the highway. And you see that show up in B114. So the JTOC transfer has a history to it. In my time here, it has always been that $20.25 million amount. But in the last few years, there has been some different proposals and some different shifting of costs between the general fund and the T fund, and recognition of the fact that the T fund, quite frankly, has been really, really strapped. And I'm just going to walk you through a few of these. Back in 2023, those of you who were around back then might remember that the governor had first proposed eliminating the JTOC transfer, and instead allowing that $20.25 million to stay in the T fund, and then use that exact amount of money to fund the next phase of the DMV core modernization project. The legislature disagreed with that recommendation. You maintained the JTOC transfer in place, but instead shifted that cost for the DMV project over to ARPA and general fund. So it was a totally revenue neutral swap that just happened to work based on that year's budget construct. Fast forward a year to FY '24. Those of you might remember that was the year of the DMV fees. And what prompted that was the governor's budget that year proposed transferring about $11 million from the general fund to the T fund to prop up the T fund. The proposal had also recommended reserving over $68 million of general fund to help the T fund with federal match needs in FY '25 and FY '26. That year, the governor had also proposed funding some transportation-related things out of the general fund and out of the cash fund, which was seeded with general fund money. $3 million for rail trail grants along the Lamoille Rail Trail and $3.5 million to pick up a piece of the cost of the new maintenance garage up in St. Albans. The legislature had a different approach that year. They did not transfer the $11 million from the general fund. Instead, that $11 million was met through $8 million of additional revenue from the DMV fees in that first partial year of implementation, and then shifted $3 million of paving costs over to the cash fund. So that's how the things were made whole for that $11 million that year. You also see that the legislature made a reduction on the rail trail grants from $3 million to $1 million and kept that $3.5 million for the St. Albans garage. So move to FY '25, the current year. The current year's budget, one other thing that you all did in FY '24 was instead of reserving $68 million, you reserved $25 million of general fund for federal match in FY '25 and FY '26. So when you cobble together that $25 million plus 2 full years of annualizing the DMV fees, it pretty much got you to that $68 million that the governor had originally proposed to use general fund for. The current year budget, FY '25, that entire $25 million that was reserved to help IIJA match in '25 and '26, that entire $25 million is used in the current year's budget. The legislature had agreed with that. You will just see on the operating statements and in the big bill that $25 million was transferred from the general fund to the T fund, and then it's spread throughout the transportation program. You all, when you did the '25 budget, when you were putting together the contingent appropriation list about what to do with any surplus that materialized at the end of '24, you reserved $12.5 million to be used for future match needs. The '26 budget that was recommended by the governor that you are currently considering fully spends that $12.5 million that was reserved on the contingent list and fully spends $20.25 million that would be left in the T fund by getting rid of the JTOC transfer. Now I see there's a question.
How about the money from information?
That is still in the budget.
It's still in the budget.
Yeah.
Coming from.
From the T fund, yeah. And it's $4 million and change.
So what was that? What would you question? I didn't hear.
No, so the information centers that you have a BGS budget, 4 million and change is coming from the transportation fund. I didn't know if that was changing too, so that's not, okay.
It is not proposed to change. We do not, just as a general rule, we really do not divert T fund to do a lot of ancillary things. Some states, that is more of a controversy than others. My home state diverts a lot of money to support their state police from their transportation fund. And it is a significant political issue down there. Vermont's T fund is relatively pure, for lack of a better word. But why we're sort of having this conversation right now is on the back of my handout. I just pasted the chart from the consensus revenue forecast. This is a little small, but I wanted to draw your attention to those percentages on the total transportation fund line that shows the year over year rate of revenue growth that's expected in transportation. You're going to see that, from FY '25 to '26, that's a 1.6% rate of growth. In all the future years, that rate of growth is significantly less than 2%. the T fund revenues are really struggling because of higher fuel efficiency. This was a trend that kicked off around FY 2005. This is really not a trend that's due to EVs, but EV adoption is going to accelerate the trend that had been in place for decades. This is due to just fuel efficiency improving in the fleet overall over the last couple decades. We also are demographically constrained. You know, if you don't have a lot of population growth, you're not going to get a lot more people registering vehicles. So our biggest source of revenue growth in the T fund has been the purchase and use tax, because in recent years, there's been a lot of demand for vehicles and the price of vehicles has gone up. But everything else is sort of stagnant or declining in an environment where costs and inflation aren't. So we all know that wages are increasing. The transportation world is not immune from that, but also the cost of construction has been increasing at a much more rapid clip. So we have a structural challenge with the T fund that Logan is going to give you a little bit more insight into. But this is my long roundabout way of saying that for the last several years, the T fund has been propped up in various ways by the general fund. This is not necessarily new. And I think the governor and the governor's administration and the legislature have acknowledged that the T fund revenues have been pretty constrained by the fact that you've continued to find new and creative ways to try to prop it up, for lack of a better word.
And we've sent money from, they've been going back and forth.
It's been going back and forth. It's been going back and forth.
Yeah, it's silly. John.
I just want to go back to fiscal year 2025. You just, I don't mean to have you repeat everything you said there, but on the second, what the legislature put into play here. So legislature appropriated the entire 25 million into last year's, the current year's budget here as proposed. They reserved an additional 12.5 million on the contingent list.
Yep.
What's the contingent list?
So-
again? Is that just a set aside?
So you will see in a few months
Okay.
that the most important month for the general fund is April. That is really the month that tells us and gives us a clear sense of whether we're going to land the fiscal year ahead or below forecast.
Right.
We tend to not have that clarity till the first few days of May, near the end of the budget development process. So as you all are fine
Excited for
tuning,
that.
yeah, it's thrilling. So as you all are fine tuning the budget down the stretch, and you get a better sense of how much sort of additional above forecast revenue might be there, the legislature will commonly put a list of appropriation priorities in that say, you know, fund these things in this order as the money is available. It's contingently available. And when you put the FY 25 budget together, one of the items on that list was reserving $12.5 million of any sort of end of year surplus in the general fund to help the T fund in future years.
So this, you can find this on a joint fiscal website, and I can show you a copy of what we did. This is the waterfall for first year, 114 million is what we did, and it was done pretty much in the committee of conference.
It was, yeah. To your point, the money that goes into the T fund not only supports things that we have to fund as a state, like DMV and highway maintenance, but a ton of it is used to match federal funds often on an 80-20 basis. So for every $20 we put in, we can draw down $80 million or $80 of federal funds for $100 of total investment.
So you have 5 more minutes.
Go ahead, Logan.
I know you can talk on this for hours, Chris.
Fill the space.
Sure, yeah. So just,
Do you have a question? Quick?
Yeah, it's just why, I had some misperception that money was being taken out of the T fund for like education or something. That's just a misperception.
That is a misperception.
Thank you.
Okay, Logan, what do you have?
Yeah, so just,
Documents of yours.
yeah, so just to follow up on the sort of necessity that federal funds play within the transportation budget, the agency came into the committees and presented sort of their federal funding analysis and sort of the gap that they were projecting given our current revenue sources. What was up here? So that's this, that's very small, but
While you're doing that, if I could just follow up to Representative LaRoche's comment, the T fund does not spend money on education. I think where the nuance is the ed fund gets a third of the motor vehicle purchase and use tax revenue.
So that again?
The ed fund gets a third of the motor vehicle purchase and use tax revenue. The other 2/3 stay in the T fund. So the T fund doesn't pay for education expenditures, but there is a transportation related revenue source that is split with the ed fund to offset property tax.
Just like Meals and Rooms, 25%
Exactly.
go to the ed fund.
But
That's on the revenue side, not on the expenditure side.
but that money isn't part of the T fund.
No, it goes to the ed fund. It's about $52 million.
Never, okay, so the DMV money is DMV, not
It
transportation.
all goes to the DMV fees all go into the T fund.
So they take this, so the ed fund, the money going to ed is coming out before it goes into the T
It
fund?
comes out of 1/3 of the motor vehicle purchase and use. By statute.
Statute, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, this sheet here that the agency presented to the transportation committees is just sort of a breakdown of what they expect to receive in federal funding. And then what the match requirements of those are to get to sort of the state match requirements. So there's a lot of information here. This is not my document, but just to sort of highlight, if you look at the projection FY27, and you go down there to the bottom, right now they're estimating around a $30 million state match deficit for next year. So the amount of federal funds we're hoping to get and the amount of state funds we have to match those federal funds, as of right now, they're estimating that it's going to be about a $30 million gap, and that will require them to do some decisions on which funds they take, which projects they push off, that sort of thing.
So this assumes that the JTOC transfer does not occur.
No, this assumes that it does occur.
I mean,
Even with it, it should say, even with it, you have a 30 million deficit?
Yes, so right now in current year, or in FY26,
this is the transfer. We don't do the transfer.
No.
this assumes that AOT,
This assumes that the 20 million comes to the general fund?
Yeah.
this assumes that the transfer no longer occurs. So the-
Okay, we're saying the same.
It stays in the T.
So it stays in the T.
stays in the,
That's what it's saying. So the transfer doesn't occur.
doesn't
It
occur.
stays in the transportation.
Otherwise, the 30 million becomes 50.
Right. Yeah.
And then further, so this projects out a few years. There's a lot of things here, a lot of the competitive grants there in the middle. We might not apply for and might not be able to do. This would be up to the agency to sort of determine, what projects they do and what projects they don't. More specifically to this year, the agency has also put together, this is your second document under my name, a memo where they sort of lay out if the transfer continues, so the 20 million continues to go to DPS, what transfer or what projects or reductions they would have to make to their budget. So they go through here from all the different sections and kind of lay out where they would take funds. The ones I'm going to point out here, just because we're short on time, is at the very bottom within the paving section. So as we mentioned, there's a lot of federal match within our projects. They're estimating that around $12.5 million of paving, state dollars in paving would have to be reduced, which would account to about $44 million in paving overall when you take into the federal funds that would have to be reduced as well. And then over the total cost they have there, about $100 million in total from the paving and the federal funds that we're expecting to get from those projects. So all that to say, these funds are baked into the agency's budget, the 20 million, and they are attached to federal dollars in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and the last comment I'll make, because you're short on time, is that the committee should just be mindful of the fact that there's a real cost to delay in the transportation space because infrastructure is always deteriorating and costs typically go up, not only with time, but as deterioration accelerates. So it is really important for you all just to be mindful of the fact that it can be very difficult to dig yourself out of the proverbial hole if you start getting behind your project schedules and getting behind the projects out when you need to get them out.
Proverbial pothole.
Yes.
That was part of my question within Joe Flynn's,
Right.
presentation here. And I did talk to Candace briefly and the chief engineer who was here as well, just to say, I want to get together more so I understand if
Right,
things aren't playing out here,
right.
what happens? And it's this list.
And this is why I wanted to have these guys come in, because in the past, the legislature has said, no, we want to keep that $20 million. And so I wanted to be sure that we all understood the implications if we want the $20 million or not. So that's important. And, the T fund has its own set of problems without us messing around with it. Right? So, Lynn.
Yeah, I just want to say, I remember, maybe it was in the days of the air money, with shovel-ready stuff, that when we had, we didn't have the match for what the federal dollars were coming in. And we had to struggle really hard to try to come up with the match, because if you don't get the match, you lose all this other money. And it's really hard to dig yourself out. And, I remember when the Great Talk was the slush fund, and people went into it for all kinds of things. It's just like we look at the purity of the egg fund, and people go into it for all kinds of things because it's the big pot. So it's, you got to be careful about it.
Right. Okay, one more last word.
Okay, I'm sorry. So looking ahead to fiscal year 27, even with out doing this transfer to the state police, we have a $30 million deficit. How do you come up with some creative solutions to address that, or are we just going to reduce the projects that we're funding?
Now, that is a great question, best directed to your legislative colleagues, I think. But the only comment I would make is you might want to keep this in mind when you're thinking about what to put on your contingent list when you're developing the budget. But there's a longer term vision to move toward things like a mileage-based user fee to better capture revenue from EV drivers. I think that's a little bit off right now, but I think every state is looking at that. Every state realizes the gas tax is increasingly obsolete. And I know that there are colleagues of yours in the building that are interested in trying to deal with this issue, but it's going to be very difficult to find one thing that really solves it. I think it's going to have to be a package of multiple solutions.
And additionally, I know there's a concern about the electric car changes and that whether that inadvertently incents people to buy them out of state or a gas-fired vehicle. But we still capture.
We
still capture the purchase.
Yeah, we get the purchase and use whenever you register your vehicle in Vermont.
I had a brief conversation at lunch. You mentioned too, got to think outside the box here a little bit about what the gap might be looking like. So it's good to get this today to kind of see what the projection.
Okay. I've got to cut this short because we have just a couple minutes. We have 9 minutes till we start the hearing, and we need to start on time because I have another meeting at 4:30. So thank you very much, both of you. I know this was last minute. You did a great job. I think it was really helpful. I might actually understand this now, so I appreciate it. Let's go offline.